It's just turned 11, so I'd make a start, Simon.
Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to our Cornacast. We've got 157 online at the moment, and we're going to spend 40 minutes talking about our corona response. I'm delighted to welcome a special guest, Dame Alison Peacock, today to go and join us. Alison joined us back in March when we were trying to wrestle with home learning, and I think, judging by assembly this morning, I'm still wrestling with remote learning and trying to get it right. But Alison, I'm delighted to see you today because we decided now to invite people for the first 10 minutes to go and inspire us. So we're not just talking about our corona response. And I'm delighted because Alison actually changed my life, my professional life, Alison did. And it changed about 3 years ago. Jan, I think you were with me, and we went to Sheffield to the very first Learning First conference, and it was just transformational. I realized that there was life outside of Cheshire in terms of education, and it was wonderful to be able to network. And I made some dear friends on that day, Alison, people like Simon Smith, Jamie Pembroke, Ros Wilson, who's joining us actually in 2 weeks for this Cornacast. So Alison, thank you for changing my professional life and getting me to reach out and look beyond Cheshire. So Alison, welcome. And then Dan will talk about the business of how the Cornacast work. But Alison, I'd like you to start us off today, if you don't mind.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Simon. And it's so lovely to see so many faces, many of whom I recognise. How lovely to be with you today. I just want to start off by saying that this is really tough. It's a really tough time, and it's tough for all of us professionally, but also personally. And I think even if we don't necessarily allow those feelings to come to the surface very often, nevertheless, they are very much there. So that sense of bewilderment, perpetual anxiety, wanting to watch the news and not wanting to watch the news, wanting to know what's going on, but also being devastated by seeing what is happening in the world and locally to us. I think that's something that we do well to recognise because it takes its toll. All of us are doing the best we can to support our communities, and head teachers in this country, I mean, I've always admired head teachers and primary head teachers particularly, just because I know how much demand there is on your time, and I know that from my own experience of being a head teacher. But since March, you have just been phenomenal. And in preparing for this, I was thinking, what on earth am I going to say to these people? You know, they're all far much more in the moment than I am. I'm trying to, from the periphery, from the work I'm doing at the Chartered College, I'm trying to speak up for you all the time at the DFE with anybody who will listen. I'm trying on social media. We're trying to provide as much resource as we can through the Chartered College to support you through this. But actually, you're the ones on the front line doing the work. And when I think about what you've been doing, it caused me to contrast your skills of leadership with perhaps the leadership that we've seen from central government. And I find them somewhat wanting. So when I was working as a head teacher, I was involved in Learning Without Limits research, and we identified some key dispositions that I'm just going to share with you because I think you'll find these hopefully helpful. So the first and the most important leadership dimension that we identified was one of openness. So the capacity to be surprised by what could be achieved, by being open to possibility. Of course, the opposite of this is a belief that there is one right way and that you have to stick to what you've said. Now, we've seen, I've lost count now of how many U-turns we've seen from this government, but this comes, I believe, from a lack of openness, from wanting to say, I've got the answers, don't question me, I know what's happening. And then time and time and time again, we've seen that actually, because this is a really difficult situation, a leadership style that enables expertise from quarters such as from the teaching profession to influence decision-making would be a much better leadership style than just asserting that you know what's right and just sticking to your guns until you have to swerve and change direction. The second disposition is one of questioning, of restlessness, of humility. Now, again, I have seen this across the profession in so many ways. Colleagues ready to adapt straight away to try and say, okay, what else can I do? And you think back to March and think about how quickly everybody had to suddenly change to trying to provide online learning, remote learning, trying to support their communities from a distance, trying to mitigate against some of the worst policies that meant our children were going hungry or our children had no digital access, trying to provide that contact. And then also trying to be there to answer the questions of our parents and to try and be as reliable as possible and as helpful as possible. I just saw a tweet this morning and I retweeted it because I thought this is just so lovely, because it was from a foundation class. And the teacher that had sent the tweet said, was to the parents saying, "We will be here to hold your hand through this." And I thought, oh, how fantastic. Our teachers, just amazing. As opposed to a disposition that says, we've got ready-made solutions and we're going to stick to them. And the worst of these ready-made solutions, I'm afraid, are given to people who don't have the expertise to carry them out. So it's no coincidence in my mind that because the NHS are leading on the vaccinations, that this is a successful programme and we're getting millions of people vaccinated because the people who know what they're doing are leading on this. I'm trying not to be political. It's pretty difficult not to be. The third disposition is one of inventiveness. You know, we've needed to be so inventive. At the Chartered College, our team have come together and we've said, what can we do that is most responsive? What do people need right now? That's what you're doing day in, day out. And you're having to do that because you can't be certain of what on earth the next policy is going to be. So being able to be creative in response to challenge is a leadership style that I know is something that you are really embracing. And again, the opposite of that is just compliance, doggedness, going with imposed models and just carrying them out regardless. And my goodness me, you're having to be persistent. Honestly, the fact that we're having to fight again for free school meals over the February half term feels ridiculous to me. I thought that argument had been won, at least in the short term, at least while we had communities who were suffering so much from poverty related to the virus and children who are going without food. I thought we'd won that argument naively. And then again, we're having to kind of gird our loins to fight again to say, no, actually, the February week is just as important as any other week. It means a week without food. And the way in which you've needed to respond to that, whether it's via the dreaded Eden Red or, you know, those awful food parcels that we've seen over the last few weeks, or, you know, helpfully, we've got a new permanent secretary at the DFE, Susan Ackland Hood. I think she is a breath of fresh air. So there's one piece of good news for you this morning. And she did at least acknowledge that if you were able to find a local solution, that was a good thing to be able to do. Thank goodness for some common sense. I've got a meeting with her at the end of this week. And at the end of this, when I've just finished this piece, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions or suggest anything that you might want me to do. The next disposition is around emotional stability. Now, this is a really hard one, because as I opened this, when I was talking to you, I was saying about how much this costs you, even though what we do as school leaders is we put a brave face on. But sometimes, you know, we just can't. Sometimes it's too hard. In my own personal life at the minute, we've just suffered a bereavement. That is really tough. And it makes it much harder to be that kind of person who comes on every day and says it's all going to be all right, because actually it calls everything into question. So being able to offer that emotional stability, though, it's not about being superhuman. It's about recognizing that your team, everybody around you, values who you are. And you being able to listen to them and show them kindness means that at times they can also show you kindness. And that matters. You're not made of Teflon. You know, you are people who lead your team, give them hope, but also you're human and you're authentic. And it's really important that we see that. The opposite of that, of course, being open to showing some of that vulnerability, is a dogged fear of failure, a fear of trying new things, which is what leads to that relentless, we'll just do it this way because we've said we're going to do it, so we're going to carry on doing it and don't you dare criticize. This is not a time for any of us to be blaming anybody. This is a time for us all to work together. And I think that's all we've been calling for from the teaching profession, is to say, listen to us, listen to the fact that we actually know our communities, we know our schools. Your guidance that you produce is well meant, I'm sure, but it doesn't always relate in any practical way to the reality of my school. Listen to us. Generosity is fundamental. And again, the generosity of realizing that There's no right way of doing things. That whatever anybody is doing, that they are doing in the best possible way that they can, has to be celebrated. And we know that our families are finding this very difficult too. So the more that the DFE requires constant online live lessons, the more pressure, ironically, they are piling on the very people who want to be supported at home. It's not realistic to be constantly hectoring children from a screen. And in fact, it's undesirable, particularly with our younger children. You know, if you think about the times when we've complained about children spending too much time on the screen, and then suddenly now we've reversed all of that. So one of the things the Chartered College is doing is producing a suite of resources for you that encourage learning beyond the screen, remote learning that is about play, that's about inquiry. Yeah, and someone's just commented, of course, it is bad for their eyes. Hence, I'm wearing glasses. I didn't wear glasses before Corona. I've been on a screen too much. And then that final disposition that is so key is the one of empathy. Really important that we are able to maintain a sense of empathy, that we can try to understand how we can offer some mutual supportiveness. And again, I see this happening all the time, but the opposite of this is defensiveness, a tendency to blame, to thrash around, to say, well, it's not my fault, it's their fault. That helps none of us. So those dispositions, the openness, the questioning, the inventiveness, persistence, emotional stability, generosity, and empathy, those qualities are the qualities that I am seeing all of the time across the profession. And you are to be absolutely applauded for everything that you are doing, because you're just brilliant. So that's my input, Simon. I'm very happy to take any questions or comments, but I just really wanted to share with you how much I appreciate your leadership at this moment. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Alison. If anybody's got any questions they want to ask Alison directly in the chat, that'd be great. And also, any comments you'd like Alison to take forward to the DFE this week at her meeting, please put those in the chat, because Alison will respond and represent our voice so well. Alison, it's so good having you as our leader, as our kind of as our person who's a teacher's teacher. Talking to the DFE, you really understand school leadership and the pressures we're under, and actually a lot of those things you're talking about and not been able to switch off. I feel like I've been on the 24-hour news cycle for the last 10 months. I can't watch proper tally, all I can watch is the news, and it's really hard. You know, we're all feeling it, but seeing people like you representing our voice so clearly is so important as well. So thank you so much for joining us. You're a dear friend of the teachers across the country, and the work you do is amazing. And I think what you described today was how the Cornacasts have worked, actually, that kind of openness, that way that we co-construct solutions to very complex problems. It's been a real pleasure being involved. We've got 200 school leaders on the chat today, and we have CEOs, local authority officers, and we've been able to untangle some of that policy from the DFE and make it work on our schools. And in fact, sometimes I think we've influenced DFE policy because we know that certain people do dial in as well. So it's been an absolute joy working with people like that, but we can't underestimate the exhaustion that we all feel, and the fact that we're having to make very complex decisions very, very quickly. So Dan, just want to go and give a quick thing around how the Cornacasts work. And Alison, you're welcome to stay. We'll see if there's any questions in the chat. If Ray has a quick look at the chat for Alison, and then we'll start with the business. But Dan, just go and talk about the Cornacast and how it works for people who are new to it.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you, Alison. That was great to hear. So we're going to be doing about half an hour of questions and answers, and this session is being recorded, so if you don't want your face on there, then please just turn your cameras off. If you have any questions, please do use the chat, and please use the chat for questions only rather than just chatting. That would be useful for when we actually collate those at the end. I think that's it. Thanks.
That's great. Alison, we kind of have two ways of recording these events. We either share them within our network, or we sometimes publish them publicly. What would you like us to do with your input this morning?
I'm very happy for anything that I've said to be heard by anybody who wants to listen to it, to be honest.
Thanks, so, Alison. Okay.
Completely up to you.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Okay, Ray, is there any questions specifically for Alison coming up in the chat?
Not specifically a question, but something that I think really resonated was around the pressure on digital. and this real conflict between parents also hearing this messaging from government about you should be providing digital, but from a pedagogic viewpoint, we know that this is absolutely not the right thing for children, but it puts school leaders in a really invidious position of trying to please everybody. I don't know if anybody saw, I can't remember the lady's name, I think her name is Amy, but she showed a tweet last night of her 6-year-old lying across a bench, and she said, this is what, did you see that, Kelsey? And this is what digital learning looks like in the home. And there are these kids absolutely bored out of their minds, but it's, unless there is something possibly from a medical point of view, I think school leaders are on a hiding to nothing at the moment. They're trying to please parents. Gavin Williamson is saying go full digital. So I think anything that you can do to get that pedagogical balance from all of these colleagues who really know that digital is not the full answer.
Can I respond to that, Simon? Is that all right?
Yes, please. Yeah, please.
Just to say that this is really important. We've got parents who are exhausted already after a fortnight, as are we, but also feeling very guilty, and this is leading to a lot of conflict in some homes. We also, we know very well that young children, if they, whatever government might think, young children do not respond by just sitting and being in front of the screen and listening. Even if they look like they're being compliant, you have to think, and I know all of you would do, what's the quality of the learning experience? So one of the things that I try and do at meetings with DFE, I've got one this afternoon, is to speak up on behalf of primary schools and early years settings, because primary schools are not just preparation for secondary schools. I know you know this, but it's too easy sometimes for the predominant voices on Twitter to be secondary, particularly male secondary voices, that don't actually understand because they've never taught young children. And the idea that you can have little ones plugged into a screen and that's going to provide you with a solution is a very naive solution indeed. So we need to make it a much richer experience, and we will be helping with that from the Charter College. So thank you.
Thank you, Alison, for that clarification, because it's disappointing when you hear Gavin Williamson saying that he expects live lessons, and the webinars and the DFE have been pushing live lessons. There's all, you know, there are schools doing some wonderful things which are very creative, which don't involve and my parents and my school tell me they want to be able to manage their day. So actually, if they want to go out for a walk with their children in the middle of the school day, they don't want to have that restriction of having a live timetable. So I think schools are doing some great things, but at the end of the day, we all know that the best place for children to be is in a classroom, and I don't think we're going to be replaced by robots in my lifetime, which is one encouraging thing about the current response to the coronavirus. Okay, folks, so we've got a few topics here that we want to discuss. I mean, just want to say thank you to Susan. Susan's doing all the admin for us at the moment, and Susan's got her own school improvement company, but she's doing this pro bono for us. We asked for some help a couple of weeks ago to help with the workload. So Susan, just unmute yourself and just say hello to everybody, because already the level of professionalism of the communications going out has gone up fivefold since Dan and I have passed over this responsibility to Susan. Just say hello, Susan, to everybody, and thank you for your
Hi everybody, and welcome to, I think we've got about 26 new people on today, which is great, and some last minute people today, so people are really finding it useful, so thank you.
Thanks, Susan, for that. So what we talked about in terms of our school opening and the school response, we came up with 4 key principles because the guidance was quite restrictive, and we were all worried that we were going to be inundated with pupils coming into schools because the key worker list is so broad, and also because we also know we're really targeting the vulnerable children to come into school this time. Last lockdown 1, only 17% of vulnerable children came into school. So inevitably numbers are higher, but the latest figures are it's around 20% for primary schools and around 5% for secondary. So I'm pleased about that. I'm pleased that there's more children coming in than came in the summer. But equally, I do know some schools where the pressures of having too many children in are putting real pressures on being able to deliver the remote learning offer as well as the risk to communities. So in Cheshire West joint union meetings, we came up with 4 key principles that Susan sent out, but I'll just go through those briefly. So in terms of the safe opening of schools, because we're not closed, is to make sure that where you can, you reduce the bubble size. whilst maintaining a decent curriculum offer, because we know in high schools and in settings that a bubble size of 6 in nursery, for example, might not go and help with the children's development as much as a slightly larger bubble size. The second one was to keep the integrity of the bubbles intact. We've seen a couple of outbreaks in Cheshire West this weekend in a primary school and a special school. So and some of that is some staff to staff contact. It's absolutely essential you do everything to keep the bubbles intact. We've closed our staff room, sadly, as a school, but they've now got catering stations within the bubbles, which are open as well. Staff to staff spread is still a huge concern for me as a school leader, and make sure, I mean, also our third principle is make sure that staff, if they can and if they want to, work from home. And we need to model that as school leaders to make sure that we're taking opportunities to model working from home. A lot of our jobs, a lot of the admin jobs can be done remotely. I'd love to be seeing people in school, but the worst thing I can do is go in and walk around all the classrooms and spread it. There's no doubt this new variant is far more contagious, because even with very small school populations, we're now seeing far more outbreaks in our schools. And fourthly, it's to make sure that teachers have enough non-contact time to go and deliver remote learning efficiently. So I'm hearing stories where teachers are in school in the day, then working through the night, preparing resources. I think also some of our teachers are their own worst enemy. If they're pre-recording stuff, they're perfectionists and they're taking far too long to make sure they have this perfect performance piece. So monitor what your staff are doing as well. And if they're spending 2 hours preparing a 1 hour lesson, that clearly isn't sustainable. So do look after your staff, make sure they have enough non-contact time. But like Alison said, you know, remote learning isn't just about digital content. There's lots of things we do within schools that we can go make sure that that the staff go and children get time away from that screen, which isn't as intensive for the staff working. So I think there's 4 key principles really do serve us well. And I've asked the unions to go and challenge on that if they feel that schools aren't doing that within our area. And I think those principles can be scaled up nationally. I spoke to Andrew Warren about them a couple of weeks ago, and he agreed. It's a shame the DfE can't put those core principles at the top of their guidance, because I think it's a good way of interpreting their guidance, which can seem quite restrictive. Okay, so moving on. We've got, I think the first thing we got asked about was around, I mean, Alison's covered live teaching, really helpful, Alison, for that. And we will go and seek out those things. Dave put something in the chat from the college, actually, Dave Waring. I've seen Dave put something in there as well. Thanks, Dave. Okay, so first thing is the lateral flow testing. That's been on our radar. So we now know that we've got to start doing the lateral flow tests in primary schools. Now, the first thing is it's for staff only currently, and it's optional. So it's optional for staff. They can't be mandated to do it. I want to kind of encourage my staff to do it, because I think it's a good way of screening to see if people are infectious, asymptomatically infectious, and we can go and ask them to come into school. But I've got a staff meeting on that tonight, so that's something that. But I'm also really pleased that this morning we heard in our secondary schools that the lateral flow tests aren't going to be used as a replacement for isolation for close contacts. So there's been quite a lot of confusion around the media and the medication. The regulator has been saying, well, they're not really fit for purpose for that use. So, but I'm pleased we've got them now as a screening tool for staff twice a week, and that's encouraging. But remember, staff can't be mandated to use them as well. So clarification on that, and the home testing as well should go and help. I'm not quite sure where we are with children being tested. Alison, have you heard anything about children in primaries being screened using the lateral flow tests?
No, but I've just got an email right now from the DfE saying that they're not going to go ahead with testing children in secondary. So that would imply
for screening, yes, yeah, that's right. It's just whether we use them for screening for our children, because I think screening is a different thing than using them as a replacement for close contacts. So so that's come on. Next thing we've also got is nursery funding. Nursery funding has caused real anxiety this last few days because there's a census coming up tomorrow, and nursery funding is being linked to how many children you are offering a place. So I know certain schools have restricted their nursery numbers over the last few weeks because nursery are entitled to a place. So what I've been advising colleagues to do is to make sure that you communicate the public health messages to your parents about why we should be, my children should stay at home if they can, and that applies to children across the school population, including nursery. But if you then restrict places, at the moment, then you may not get the funding. So the advice from the NHT was really clear from Paul, I think, or James yesterday, to make sure you've got an audit trail. So I've sent out a Google poll when we were to offer parents a nursery place. All our parents were offered a place in nursery. They responded on the Google poll, but some have chosen to keep them at home because actually they're trying to follow the public health messaging as well. But if you have restricted numbers and told parents they can't have a place, then you could be your funding could be in jeopardy as well. Dan, do you want to add anything to that?
No, sorry.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Sorry, my dog's not very well in the background, so I wasn't really.
Oh, Dan, go and give your dog
sorry.
CPR for goodness sake. Don't ignore your dog. We can manage without you. So okay, vaccinations is the next one. Before we go now, vaccinations. It's really interesting. Some local authorities have started to prioritise some of the education staff. I heard that one is prioritising nursery staff. I've heard of others prioritising staff in the special needs sector as well. So have those conversations with your local public health people, because there is there are some there is some flexibility, and we know with the Pfizer vaccine, because it does perish quite quickly, sometimes there might be some capacity. I know my mum and dad were given the vaccination on Friday, even though they're over 75 and not over 80, because I think they are trying to make sure these stocks don't get thrown away. So have a conversation. In terms of prioritizing teachers, that's a really interesting one, because when we met with Matt Butler a couple of weeks ago, I was one of the NHT's things was to get teachers vaccinated. However, phase one, if you recall, there's 26 million people in phase one. It's about stopping deaths. And if we vaccinate all the people in phase one, it means that 99% of deaths will be stopped. So, but there is an argument around, if we're going to open schools to the wider population, to go and make sure that we go and prioritize teachers. I think there's also an argument for, if you're on that phase one list because you have a medical vulnerability, and I've got a colleague on the call today who's clinically vulnerable, and I know that many of us maybe in an age category that means we're more vulnerable. I think I'd really want the DfE to go and consider vaccinating those staff who are in phase one as soon as possible, because at the moment I'm in the over 50 bracket, so I'm not likely to be vaccinated until Easter. If they're doing 2 million a week. So so I think it's just thinking about those ways that we can go and go make sure that teachers before a full return to school are vaccinated, but also any teachers that have a vulnerability because of age or because of a medical condition, that we get pushed to the top of the list as soon as possible, because it is worrying when staff are going into school and being exposed to inherently more risk. Okay, so I think that's it. We had something on Ofsted as well, Dan, didn't we? Do you want to pick that up, Dan? If your dog's okay?
Yes, she's back up and about now. Sorry, she was having a seizure in the background. So, so the Ofsted had we had a question about Ofsted and whether there was a framework around what Ofsted would be inspecting. I don't think it's changed since the guidance that we had back in December. Ofsted had a blog that was released on the 12th, which I'll copy into the chat, but it's obviously they're not going to do any on site till after the half-term break, although that might change as we go forward. And it's for RRI and special measures school mainly, but they will be following up on complaints from parents. But I think that has to go through the complaints procedure first, the school complaints procedure, and so on. So I don't think it's an immediate threat, those inspections.
Yeah, really important. I think if Ofsted call you and say we've had a complaint about your home learning, then make sure Ofsted make sure that parents has followed the school complaints procedure, because some parents tend to bypass that and go straight to Ofsted. So there's also draw your attention to the deferral process as well, because if you're a special measures school or a RRI school, and I know that one of my colleagues had an outbreak you were dealing with yesterday all day, I think it's perfectly reasonable if you've got an outbreak in your community to ask for a deferral with Ofsted. I know they were doing that in the autumn term, but I just know that your priority shouldn't be to be on a Zoom call with Ofsted for all day if you've got an outbreak in your community and you're trying to deal with that. So please look at the deferral notes within the December guidance that Dan referred to, because it's important we get we go and make sure Ofsted are working with us, and and I think it's really sensible that the Ofsted workforce said that they didn't want to do site visits, and that was their union went and said it was unsafe for them to do so. So we shall see. But any feedback on those Ofsted visits, I'd really welcome them, so I can feed them back to the NHT. Okay, I think we're good there. So Susan, any questions that have come in this week that we've forgotten about or missed? No, thanks, Susan. Okay, Ray, can you go and look at the chat and see if there's anything? You've got 10 minutes for the chat questions.
The lateral flow testing is a key area that colleagues are talking about, and a question has come up which again needs some clarification. Has Gavin Williamson not paused the daily testing this morning? That's asked by Margaret, because I know that the issue is around secondary testing, but I just wonder, Simon, whether you have a view whether this is something that's actually going to be paused or whether you're thinking it's still going ahead as planned.
No, I'm pretty sure now, especially for primary schools where it's home testing, that the daily testing was to replace contacts isolating. So they said that won't be happening now at secondary schools. The MRHA hadn't approved it for that, and they certainly won't approve it for home testing as well. So it's seen as too high a risk with the transmissibility of the new variant. One thing they may do is what they did with high schools, is when they were opening wider to some pupils, they were testing them before they were allowed on site. But predominantly that, it's just for staff at the moment. But I think all the unions went and pushed back against the secondary proposal to do mass daily testing for close contact. So unless the MRHA actually approve that, I think we're on very strong grounds not to accept that as a replacement for isolating of close contacts.
We heard yesterday in the training, colleagues, didn't we, that if a staff tests positive, that they then need to take a PCR test. But a very good question has come through. I think it's from Mr. Greaves, and he's asking, if a staff tests positive on the lateral flow test, do you then immediately close the bubble, or do you have to wait for the PCR to come through? And I think that needs some clarification either from the DFE or Public Health England, unless you have a view yourself, Mr. Kidwell.
Yeah, I don't know what the DFE guidance is in this, but I'd be closing my bubble because we know that the lateral flow tests are accurate, 98, I think 99%. So they can miss, if you test positive on a lateral flow test, it's 98, 99% likely you've got the virus, and they're as accurate as the PCR test. Where they're not as accurate is picking up people who've got it, who may not be at peak infection rates. So that's where the unreliability comes, but it's as reliable as the PCR test. So I would be closing that bubble immediately if a member of staff goes and tests positive.
I certainly think that having the lateral flow test are going to be really helpful in the view that as we heard yesterday, 1 in 3 people who've got the virus don't even know they've got the virus. And I heard from a colleague that the idea of the anosmia is something that people are really aware of, but she was told by a GP that not being able to have a sense of smell only comes in on day 6, by which time you could have had the infection and infected others. So anything that gives more reliable data, I think, can only be a useful thing. So then the next question, again around LFT, is whether colleagues are expecting that there will be increased disruption with potentially more staff absent. My view, of course, is we'll only know as we try it, but that could be a consequence the more that you find out. So it's almost like what Trump was saying: if we don't test people, we don't have the virus. So that is going to be something we're going to find out a bit more once we get going.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've got a staff meeting with our staff tonight. So if somebody does test positive, we're 2 form entry schools, so their teaching partner would then do the live teaching of the children in school. Because if they're coming into school and test positive using the lateral flow test, it's likely they're asymptomatic. So hopefully they're well enough to go and man the home learning offer there, and that's specific to my 2 form entry school. I know smaller schools may have different arrangements. You may choose to not test all the staff on a Monday. You may choose to stagger that over a Monday and a Tuesday, because they should be done 3 to 4 days apart. So if if you're worried about that, it might be worth staggering the testing of staff over that 2-day period, so that you don't get and you could also do it the night, ask staff to do it the night before they come in if you want to have more notice to sort out cover. We've decided in our school to do it the morning before, but we think because we're running at about 20 to 25%, so we do have quite a lot of capacity in our school to go and cope with that disruption.
So the question about half-term break is coming up. Certainly from Cambridgeshire, we've been asked just to find out from parents whether critical workers need a space. And what we're looking at here is a holiday club. But I imagine there'll be local responses, and every local authority will be different as to how they're being advised over half-term. But this is a question that has been posed. Do we think we'll be asked to open over half-term?
Well, we don't know yet, so we just speculate. I know Kent have said they won't be, but I remember lockdown 1, and we felt we opened over bank holidays for our parents, and we did open over the Easter holidays. So I just think it's but equally your staff need a break as well. So I think your idea, Ray, about doing a holiday club for those absolutely essential workers who can't get anything else, then I'd certainly open to ideas in our school community around that. But I would want to make sure it's run by volunteers who are paid additional monies to do that.
Certainly, I don't know how far Premier Sport is, whether that's a national organisation or just a local one, but their staff will not have been as busy, so they are welcoming the opportunity to do holiday clubs so that it gives their people work.
Yeah, and it's only for those key workers. It's not for your vulnerable. It's for those key workers. So you would expect those parents to pay for childcare as well, which should hopefully enable you to pay your staff for that.
Last question about just to reaffirm, really, people are talking about how important vaccinations are going to be, particularly in early years and all through the sector. So if there's anything that Dame Alison can support with and put that message forward, I know that would be appreciated. And then the last question really is about organisation on Parents' Evening this term. To be honest, I hadn't even thought about Parents' Evening this term, so I'm amazed somebody's commented on that. But I know there are different ways of organising that. We used an online system for the first time, and my colleagues preferred it because they were able to keep to time and use the time effectively. The person here, I think it's Jane, is talking about one-to-one phone calls as a way of catching up. But those are all the questions from the chat that I've been able to see so far.
Thank you, Ray, and thank you so much for your attendance today. So 214 on the line, so it's good to see everybody. We'll meet again next week. We've got Paul Whiteman coming next week, who's my colleague, trade unionist and leader of the NHT. And then the following week, we've got Ros Wilson, who's coming to inspire us as the grand Dame Alison of education. You're the Dame and she's the grand Dame. So look forward to seeing Ros, and she's very much looking forward to engaging. So if you've got any ideas of people you'd like to hear from who would inspire us and give us 10 minutes of their time, let us know and we'll get in touch. And I want to say thank you to the team today. And Alison, thank you so much. Would you like the last word, Alison, before we all sign off?
Just to say thank you. That's all. Thank you and good luck.
Lovely to see you, Alison. Thanks for your engagement and your positivity and your and just the way that you represent us as a teaching profession. Okay, thanks everybody. So see you next Wednesday. Any questions to Susan in between in the chat, and Susan will pick those up. Any urgent questions, we're always happy to respond to colleagues as well. But anything we can answer next week, go and put it in the chat, and we'll see you at 11 o'clock next week.